Today I'll be commenting on Neville Goddard's lecture, The Artist is God. And while I do enjoy the footage from the first Thai restaurant we've been to in the Japanese countryside near Mount Fuji, one of Neville's dreams in this world was to make himself in the image of a successful minister of the Word of God. But he knew he would have to start at the end. And you can use the same technique that he used for anything, whether it be a great artist, whatever your dream is. Whatever your dream is, that's your image. And it always comes back to the simple formula. Ask yourself, how would you feel right now if you were your dream, that image? Can you believe your assumption is true even though your reason and senses deny it? Can you persist in your imagination as the highest level of your being persists? The way Neville says it, it sounds so simple. And until you catch that feeling that you know it's done and you no longer hunger or are triggered by reality, you are told to persist. Repeat the act again. Now Neville shares a story in this lecture of a close friend of his who was originally from a very poor Jewish family in Russia, but was now residing in New York City. When this dear friend of Neville's was a child, living in very hard times, he would wrap his feet in newspapers just to feel warm. His clothing always came from charity, but as Neville says, like all men, he brought his innate knowledge with him when he came into this world. So he had a natural sense of the law, of manifesting, imagining. He would imagine, as he saw a cashier changing money, he thought to himself, wouldn't it be wonderful if he made a mistake? And in his imagination, he imagined that a mistake was made. And in his imagination, he felt the joy and figuring out all the things he was going to buy with this money. He would buy a pair of slacks, a pair of shoes, and eat until it came out of his ear, a thing he had never experienced before. And he walked many blocks in this mood. The next day, when Joseph returned to the same teller, the man made the mistake. As Joseph left the bank, he wrestled with himself, but his poverty and embarrassment were greater than his ethical code. So he went to another bank and changed the money into the correct denominations and kept the overage. That night, he bought himself a pair of slacks, new shoes, and ate at a restaurant until he could eat no more. And of course, he wrestled with his conscience all night. But he learned an important lesson, a priceless lesson. An assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact, or in this case, an assumption, though false, if so joyfully felt with no opposition, it can just as much harden into fact as well. Now remember, Joseph was just a boy when he did this, and when he became older, he became a millionaire, and he gave back a lot of his own volition to help the less fortunate. And that is one theme I sometimes find in my own experiences, as well as other successful testimonials, of how people are just playing around in imagination. Many times people don't retrace their thoughts in the harvest, but in this case he did. And if we can be more aware in our own lives, and even more intentional, and learn to make it more playful and joyful. But the one thing we can learn in the unintentional fantasies, when you're lost in a fantasy or daydream, it's almost like falling into a night dream, where you forget about reality for a moment, and it feels as real as reality. And this is what we're learning to do intentionally. But not every fantasy or daydream manifests so suddenly like this one. So this is why we persist, regardless if it seems nothing is going on, especially if you're choosing some dream that seems so far away. Neville says, there's nothing but God, but man, not knowing this, creates opposition and calls it Satan or the devil, both of which are just as non-existent as Saint Christopher. Millions believe in them and give them power they do not possess. But I urge you to believe in nothing but God, who is your own wonderful human imagination. Let us say for a moment we were to entertain what Neville said here. Basically, that there is nothing but imagination, and everything on the outside you gave life and power to, knowingly or unknowingly. But when you look at the manifestation and you feel it has a power over you, then that will reflect your belief, and then you may feel helpless at times with things that seem on the outside. But this is your chance to reclaim that power. For some, this may seem crazy or even blasphemous, and for others, you've already been testing this out and finding out for yourself, and realizing a greater truth beyond the rational mind and its limitations, and beyond the projections of a limited mind. When a limited mind casts its projections, how can you but see limitation in the outside world? But always there's that seed of greatness showing you that great things can still happen. Because that's what you are. You're a seed of God. a seed that goes beyond limitations. Anything that can be properly imagined and persisted as need be can find its tangible expression in the dream of life that you call 3D reality. Neville talks of another friend who is a pianist, and she knew how to enter a vision where she is trained by one of the great pianists, Chopin. And Neville says the spiritual instruction is possible, for she is the spirit of Chopin, as in the depths of her soul they are one. We are all one, and that's why we can also use the imagination in a way to tune into any energy of greatness, to bring it into ourself on a spiritual level that once gels can express itself in a tangible experience in our life. Neville goes on to say, if in your mind's eye a certain person is great, and you want to be as great as he is, or she, you will draw him or her out of yourself to instruct you. You are only instructing yourself, however, for every vision takes place within the human imagination. All that you behold, though it appears without, it is within your imagination, of which this world of mortality is but a shadow. So choose an image you would like to express. Feel you are that image. Appropriate it, and it must come forth into your world of shadows. And this is what Neville calls the true art of prayer. For prayer is your own wonderful human imagination drenched with feeling. So become aware of your prayers and learn to intentionally, properly pray. And Neville goes on to say he has seen countless story after story of people who drenched themselves in the feeling of their desire, and they got it. He says, feel the wedding ring, if that is your desire. Feel the thrill of applause, or the joy of a child in your arms. Anything is possible if you can feel it. But if you are going to use reason, it will never happen, because failure becomes your image. What is your deep conviction? What image do you believe yourself to be? Is it that you're a failure or a success? Neville asks you to question, do you believe the headlines in the paper? Do you get frightened? Are you guilty of thriving on crisis? And he tells how people are paid to write the headlines. They focus on the negative because it sells more news. Good stories are often hidden towards the end. So Neville's telling you, ignore the headlines. Remain faithful to your image. Figure out what you really want, and don't worry about the difficulty. Don't let your words and the energy behind them block its fulfillment. No one would have bet 1 nickel on me when I left the little island of Barbados at the age of 17, having voiced a desire to be a minister of the Word of God. And you too can do the same thing. Do the unbelievable. Remember these teachings and keep testing your imagination out. Keep refining it. Become the greatest image you sense for yourself. In closing, Neville says, I'm telling you what I know from experience. I'm not theorizing. I'm not speculating. I hope you will so believe me that when I depart this world, you will not forget my message. May I tell you, you may think you have wavered in the forming of that image you set out to do in the beginning, but you have not, for the depth of your being and my being are one, and that brotherhood has never once faltered. He agreed in the beginning to dream this dream of life in concert. This we have done and will continue to do until the image is formed in each one of us. So realize what Neville's saying here. We are one and the same. He succeeded in his vision, and know that he is backing success in the ultimate vision of each of your lives. Until this brother-sisterhood that we have, we each find our success and wake in the dream of life. We come back to where we were before it all started, something the mystics paint as so wonderful, a love beyond all loves. And the dream of life we call 3D reality is just the cherry on top. Now, let us go into the silence. Good.